Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today for our kitchen table talks. I really love this name. It's really naturally connected to our house meetings, opening the door for the Redress in San Jose that we are exhibiting downstairs right now. We see the kitchen table because we wanted to have a really casual conversation, and then also that's where the conversation starts. So that same spirit actually inspired the house meetings. So before we start our amazing panels, I wanted to talk a little bit about how we make our exhibit. So the first question is that, well, when we started building this exhibit, we had a few questions, like where did Redress begin? So when we think about the Redress movement, like we often think about the Civil Liberty Act, 1988, the left one, very iconic photo. Everybody saw probably once or twice at least. Or like a congressional hearing, or like a national organization or organizing. But this moment, of course, these are very, very important Japanese American historical moments. But we wanted to ask a little bit different and a deeper question, like where did this movement actually begin? So for many Japanese Americans, Japanese immigrants in this area, it began much earlier than this exact moment. This was 1988, but Redress movement itself started in late 70s at least. It's actually, the conversation started much earlier too. So it begins actually when someone opened the front door for their home. So to welcome community people, neighbors, friends, and then other fellow Japanese American and Japanese immigrants people to come inside their own house, and then they started a conversation. So people share the tea, people share the meal. The most importantly, they share stories. And then they often remain unspoken for decades. So those stories about the incarceration camp experience from the first generation of Japanese American, Issei, or second generation of Japanese people, Nisei people. So their conversation started in somebody's house. So that's the scene we put on this exhibit. So as trust grow, the conversation grow. So eventually the conversation grew into the organizing, and then organizing grew into the community action. And then community action became part of the national Redress movements. So that's what we are talking about here. Before the conference room talking, or like before this type of like official picture happened, everything started from somebody's living room. So that's what the theme around this exhibit downstairs. So if you didn't see the downstairs exhibit, please, after this program, take a look downstairs. My next question was, why tell the story of San Jose? As we began our research, when I started doing the research about this exhibit, I was having trouble actually securing a good historical photo or a history or the paper documents. That was one of the biggest struggle I had, because it wasn't like just the Sansei people like you guys. They are really focused on preserving Issei and Nisei's story. Then they forget about themselves. so that's why I conducted some oral history interview with them, and then also get a lot of informational session together, and then started talking about the San Jose story. Because when I tried to search the Redress movement, what happened in San Jose, it's not on the book almost at all. I found a little bit of a talking, Richard Katsuda was talking about the San Jose movement, but otherwise I couldn't find almost anything about the San Jose Redress movement. But actually I've been hearing about that from Tom and Susan all the time. So like, why? So like, why it's not on the book? It's so much deep story, so much great story, but I couldn't find on the book. So that's my starting point, and then that's why I wanted to tell the story about San Jose specifically, not about the San Francisco, not about the Los Angeles, not about the DC, but the San Jose. So, okay. So another thing is like why I use this photo. So this photo is actually, it's not 70s photo or 80s photo. It's actually 1990. So it's a little bit outside of my initially set the time frame, but because of the house meeting was such a private and then really like a safe space for them, so they didn't take any picture. It's not for like photo session or anything. So this photo was actually our very beloved local history detective, Kurt Fukuda, took this photo. So you see, I picked this picture because Susan is on it. But I also realized there's another Susan and then Masao on it. So I didn't actually notice until somebody pointed out. But this one, it really captured the atmosphere of the house meeting. It's in the setting of somebody's living room. People get together, intergenerational, and then you see a little bit of the leftover plates on there. So probably potluck happened a little bit before, and then they started having the talking session. So that's I wanted to point it out that sometimes the history, they didn't leave any photo. So, but that's also very, very important moment. So that's what we want to capture. We wanted to capture through oral history or this kind of like panel discussion, or we're gonna have a roundtable later. So the type of conversation is the way we preserve the very historical moment for this. So I wanted to a little bit introduce what, when you are inside the exhibit, I want you to look at these three very important sections. So one of them is on the left, it's a picture and a little bit of pin. So this is knock knock. So this one is Jane Kawasaki, the Uwaikai's Jane Kawasaki made a little porcelain mold, and then also they paint it to, and then they sell for the fundraising. So we happen to, Judy and everybody actually preserve really tiny pin. It's really cute pin. So we actually put the original in there, and then next to that Richard Katsuda actually selling those pins for the back. So another one is the community table, the bottom picture. So this section, so right now, so for the preparing for the next roundtable, I didn't put the picture yet right now, but usually a bunch of picture on the table, and then people from community actually join to identify who's on the photo. So as a collection manager here, one of my biggest struggle is people donate the picture, but I don't know who that is. And I can tell that's very important people, and also I can tell that's community people, but I cannot tell who that is. I want to know the name. So this table helped me a lot. So we can, people, if you know anybody from that picture, please join to identify who that is. So the last one I wanted to point out is this cute vinyl jacket, Tom and Susan. So this section is, I asked the students here, they're here too. So they're gonna be a moderator today, but I asked them to, could you listen those oral history, and then could you make some design for it? So that kind of we wanted to preserve the, we wanted to have a 70s theme house, but also have nice oral history integration. So please try to pick it up, and then behind this jacket, it usually, the profile of artists and stuff there, but we put a quote from the oral history there. And then there's a QR code on it, so you can actually listen to those stories directly too. So those a little bit of here, little bit of an interactive piece in there too. So lastly, I wanted to talk, and then also this is my last question for this exhibit, was what is still missing? I tried to capture the atmosphere of 70, and then I wanted to make this room as somebody's bajan's house, but also it's definitely something is missing. And then that is that is you can find on the shelf in the kitchen section. I wanted to have a little bit of interactive piece. If you open the shelf, we're talking about the Japanese Latin American people's information in there. So there's some aspect for the Redress movement. We also know about the Redress movement, but how many of you know about their struggle, the Japanese Latin Americans struggle and an effort to make the Redress happen is still ongoing. So those type of information, we know about the Redress movement, but we don't know that type of little bit of not like something that we don't, if you don't look into it, we don't find it. So I wanted to make physically you can open it and then dig into it, then so that you know about this very important fact about the Redress movement. So that's all about my exhibit creation. So thank you so much for listening. Let's get started. I'm going to pass on to the Yuki, who is our board, and then also today's moderator for the panel.
Thank you. Can we give another round of applause to Chisa? Oh my goodness, Tina, thank you. Also, I need to make sure to highlight Tina as well. Tina, thank you for all your effort to organize this today. Welcome, everyone. We are going to be doing our panel discussion, and it's titled Kitchen Table Talks. So on that note, I kind of want to treat this as though I'm inviting everyone to do a meal with me, and we're doing it together. And so this conversation, I want it to be free-flowing. Feel free to jump in at any point. I mean, I will say, Yumi, do you want to take this question first? And then, but if you want to respond to it, feel free at any point to jump in. So, like Chisa was mentioning, when we think of redress and reparations, I think oftentimes we think of, yeah, that's cute. You'll see some photos being circulated around, and they're photos that they had shared ahead of time for us. But as Chisa was saying, a lot of the story of this movement is settled around, the policies or the photo-taking moments, right? Like the larger moments. But really where it began is through little moments like at the kitchen table, or maybe when we are driving to a pilgrimage and you're talking to friends, or maybe in church, or maybe in community centers where, people were just gathering and meeting each other and speaking with each other and realizing, yes, there is something we can do here. There's something that we can do together. And those relationships are really what sustained this movement. And so I really want to get to the heart of that today. And as I was prepping with the panelists, I asked them, how did you all meet? And it really struck me, it wasn't just about how they organized, but it's how they found each other too, right? So Francis and Yumi, you first met as students at Stanford when Francis was playing his jazz records from his dorm room, and everyone could hear it, so Yumi came over and knocked and said, hey, I like that music you're playing. And that's kind of like their first intro to each other. And I know that this recent Monday, you celebrated your 40th anniversary, so congratulations. And Susan and Tom, I sneakily asked Tom the other day, how did you two meet? And my understanding is you met at a pilgrimage. Is it Tule Lake pilgrimage? Yeah. And I think, Tom, you were a speaker as a student rep, and Susan, you were a moderator? Is that correct? Something like that?
Yeah, I was the MC.
You were the MC. And apparently, Tom was speaking really fast. And there was a translator to be able to translate what Tom was saying. And he was going too fast for the translator, so Susan was saying, slow down. And that was kind of like their first intro to each other. And I just thought that was very heartwarming. And I know you two are celebrating 42 years together, so congratulations to that too.
There's a photo of me rolling my eyes while he's giving his speech.
We'll make sure to share that with everyone later. That's a treasured moment right there. But what I wanted to share with these little stories because it really reminds us that movements aren't really built only through strategy or those big meetings that happen. It's actually in the relationships that we build, the way that we've connected with each other through smaller conversations that become really meaningful later on as well. And that's what drives movements. So with that, I want to open it up for my first question to all of you, because when I look at each of you, right? And I've heard each of your names all throughout the years that I've been in the Japantown community. And I really wanted to think of you as like, you're such incredible activists, right? But I remember when I was preparing and speaking with you all, that's not necessarily the word that you would have used to describe yourselves at the time. So I'm curious, how does the word, activist feel to you? Or back then, do you think that you would have embraced that term? Or how else would you have described what you were doing at the time? So Yumi, can I point to you first and put you on the spot to try to answer this first question?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because we had that prep session, and we were talking about how activists, the word, may have changed as far as how we look at that, and today maybe people think that it's something really different to be a quote activist, but also, activism I think is much more part of our mainstream. Everybody, from the left to the right to the wherever wants activism. We an engaged, citizenry or engaged community. Everyone is seems to be looking for that. So it's a different era. I think that activism, we didn't really say, oh, I want to be an activist. I'm giving this little background because then I did this Facebook post for my anniversary and I said, oh, activists get married too. So I think, that was a little bit of a outcome of our pre-discussion. But in some ways, I thought, oh yeah, I did think about that, is that, well, we're very active in the community, or community activism, maybe we talked about, or being active in the community. And I think the more, I think for me, one of the questions was, how radical do you want to be? You can be active, but how radical do you want to be? And how do you want to be identified as a radical or not? And that was a bigger, I think, concern among some of us. So, anyway, I forgot what your question was.
You've answered it.
I could, I mean, one little moment is that, I brought along this Asian American Women's Journal that we put together at Stanford. And one of the articles was by Wendy Yoshimura. And it was a little story by her about what happened to her. I don't know if people realize what happened to her. You can look that up. But she was a quote radical. She inquired. She became active with some radicals, and so she wrote about that. And I was just telling Francis on the way back that, it's a really inspiring story of somebody who explored radical ideas, dangerous ideas at the time. And as she was working, her folks got arrested. She was framed, for associating with radicals. And so, and because of Japanese American community support, she got a fair trial. So I thought, that edge, how much of a risk you want to take to explore possibly dangerous ideas in society at that time. Society of real empowerment, systemic change, and, the sources of oppression. That kind of stuff we had to dare to explore. And I did meet several people who dared to explore and were just erased from even our activist history. I'm talking about Eichel. There were students at Stanford who stood up to, what is his name? Shockley.
Oh, yeah.
And they were expelled. She took years trying to get back and finishing her degree. And, I just felt, well, I don't know if I could do that. But anyway, it was kind of like just the little pieces of radical women, radical history that I would just kind of look out for and say, that's interesting. That could be Japanese American people too. You just have to dare to explore and maybe be labeled a radical. That was bad. That was, to be labeled a radical, that was worse. I think for decades. Yeah, it was. So just flash into 1977, South Africa, Stanford out of South Africa sit-in in May of 1977. So we were part of the sit-in, and I chose to be arrested, and I chose to be part of the summer, kind of like the trial, because there was education. Why did this happen? So when I got arrested anyway, of course I had to tell my parents who are in New York, my family. I don't know exactly when my father, who we rarely really talked about too much, especially schooling, but he just said, "Oh, Dre, don't become radical." He's a Shin Issei. So, so he just says, "Oh, don't become radical." And I just thought, that's interesting. I never even heard him say that word. The Japanese accent and all that. So anyway, it was just a little signal, that, okay, maybe I'm kind of getting to the border here, getting to the edge of what people could take. But anyway, that was more the question.
Thank you so much. And did you want to respond? Yes, go ahead, Francis.
Well, I just wanted to provide footnotes. So how many of you have heard about Patty Hearst? SLA? Okay, so the folks who didn't raise their hand, you want to look that up, and because it was not, it was a very important thing, and it's tied into Angela Davis and the prison movement. So if you want to, you hear around people talking about prison abolition and things like that. So this is all part of people were taking action at its time, just like Assata Shakur, Mumia Jamal, and all that. So, so the fact that there was an Asian American woman, Japanese American woman, who was connected to that, and basically put her life on the line to just explore it, and then what was the other thing that I wanted to footnote? Well, maybe that's enough.
Oh, thank you so much, Francis. I'm actually curious, can you take us back to the moment when you realized, I want to be a part of this? I want to try to do something here with reparations, redress. Do you remember that first time that you really felt that?
Well, so probably in 1975, there was, so my older brother, my late brother, had been involved in the Third World Strikes at UC Berkeley. So most people heard of that? Okay. So, but that's also a turning point, because that's when the term Asian American actually emerged, into, and represented not a demographic category, but it was a political affirmation. And so my brother brought home books from his Asian American Studies course, and one of the books was this guy named Tenbrook. He wrote a book called Prejudice, War, and the Constitution. And actually, I recently just looked him up again, because so I read this book and it had a big impact on me, because it detailed the legal history of the camps. But not only that, he also talked about the Sleepy Lagoon case, which is because basically he had this argument that after they got rid of the Japanese, they were going after the Latinos, or the Mexican Americans. And so that's where the Zoot Suit riots came. So he linked the Zoot Suit riots with the incarceration of Japanese. But anyway, Tenbrook actually was a disability, one of the first disability activists. He was blind. No, deaf. No, is it deaf? Somebody look that up. I looked it up, but it just kind of in one ear. But anyway, he was an important activist, and so so just seeing it in detail, because I had heard about the camps because my neighbors were Japanese American, and they came over one time and they were looking at the china in our cabin, and they said they had china in there. They had china like that, but they lost it when they had to go to camp. Because see, we were in South San Francisco, and they went to Tan Fran. You know, so I think out of the strikes, you know, this sense that this was a really grave injustice, and that I found out about it because of the strike, Third World Strike. But also at the same time in '75 was the Soweto uprising. And so Stephen Biko, that's another name. So this sense that young people were taking, I guess, history into their own hands. And so as a 17-year-old, 16, 17-year-old, and then my brother was part of it too, then I felt like, well, this is what coming of age is all about. And a sense that could be a purpose, you know, for my life at the time.
Thank you so much, Francis. I remember earlier we were talking about, like, you know, I'm hearing your stories about the 70s, and it sounded really like a renaissance of, you know, Asian American movement as well. But I'm sure that it comes with a lot of different challenges that you had experienced as well throughout that. But thank you for sharing how you came to it. And Susan Tom, I want to come to you and ask you kind of similar question of, like, can you take us to the moment that, you know, Susan, you remember thinking, I want to be a part of this? And did that also come with a feeling like, this is me becoming an activist, or not necessarily that?
So I had a different experience. I felt like I was swimming in a miasma, and I was trying to get out, and I didn't have a choice. I could just lie there on the bottom, or I could try to get out. So my parents were in camp. I spent most of my childhood in an all-white neighborhood in Orange County, which is very conservative. I remember reading, my mother had a lot of books, and she had Citizen 13660, which is by Mina Okubo. It's basically a graphic novel about her experience at Tan Fran and at Topaz. And I remember looking at it over and over and over again because it had pictures, and I got it. I understood what my parents had experienced, and I wanted to tell my teacher. I was in 3rd grade, and I went and I stayed after class, and I waited while she was washing the blackboards, and I said, Miss Gormley, my parents were in this prison camp during World War II, and she didn't even stop. She said, that didn't happen. And I felt like, I mean, basically looking back, I got gaslit by my 3rd grade teacher, right? And I thought, wow, there's a secret knowledge that my family has and nobody else knows this. It was like so weird, right? And meanwhile, I'm having these debates on the playground. What are you? I'm a human being. What are you? I'm an American. And I said, I was born in this country, so I'm an American. And they said, no, you're not. And my parents were born here. They're an American, I'm an American. They said, no, you're not. And so I grew up very interested in racism. For a long time, I thought maybe racism had to do with being stupid. But then I went to Stanford and I discovered that it wasn't, because because there were racist people at Stanford. So also I'm swimming out of the murk. So I got a letter that said, do you want to live in the Asian theme house? And I kind of did, because, you know, like a lot of Asian Americans who grow up in isolation, you feel very uncomfortable being with Asians. And that's part of that whole, don't be seen with other Asians, don't be Asian, don't be Japanese, don't be, you know, just don't be who you are, you know. And so I knew that there was something wrong with me. I told my mom I needed to see a psychiatrist, and she said, no, I don't think you really need that, do you? And I wanted to go to college so I could go to the student health center and see a psychologist. But I wanted to go to, and I asked my parents, could I go live in this house? And they were very quiet, and then they said, I don't think you should. It's dangerous. And so this is like the legacy of what my parents experienced as, you know, teenagers getting out of camp. So they were old enough to get that message, right? And so I didn't, and it took me 2 years, and the intersection with Yumi and Francis was when I went to the big 1976 sit-in to divest from apartheid. And I was really interested in this topic. In my high school, there was a girl who went as a exchange student to South Africa, and I was like, oh my God, kept telling people, I couldn't go there. It was just such a weird thing, And obviously she was going to a white school in South Africa. And so anyways, I eventually made my way over to the Asian American Students Association. I still remember, and I knew I had been raised in an environment that was sick. And it wasn't my parents' fault, it was society's fault. And I still remember, and I think I met Hope there, but I remember being really scared at that first meeting. I was shaking. I remember trying not to look like I was visibly shaking. Anyway, that's how I got there.
All right, Tom. Your turn, clearly.
Same question, huh?
Same question.
Let's see. Well, I'm out of this group. I didn't go to Stanford. But I went to UCSC. Well, actually, Frank right here, he was before me, senior there. But the college part was very important to me. I grew up in an environment very similar to Susan. That's, as we got to know each other, that was one of our bonding things, like what her experience in high school was, and what mine was. I grew up in South Sunnyvale. I went to Homestead High School. Some of you might know. It was very different back then. There were no Asians there. Now there's like mostly Asians. But anyway, my experience in college was very important. I had 2 older brothers that preceded me, and they very specifically told me, when you go to college, you should take advantage of that, and you should get involved in the Asian American student movement, because they had the same experience I had growing up, similar to what Susan said, and this helped them. So they were encouraging me. So I got the hint. And at the time when I went to UCSC, they didn't have Asian American Studies program, but they were starting to teach some classes. And those classes had a big impact on me. Through that, I started to understand who I was and my identity. So people talk about identity politics, and it's a real thing, but my exposure at that time wasn't so much just being Asian was important, or Asian culture. It was that you're part of this history that you didn't learn. And this history is important for everybody, for the whole country. So it's up to you to help people understand this history. And this will answer some of the questions you had about why you treated the way you were, why you called these names, why you felt so bad about yourself growing up. And now you understand, I'm part of this history, and I'm part of this whole group of people that we are calling Asian Americans. Because you have to understand, at that time, it was still a new thing, right? Not just Japanese, Chinese, but this unity of these groups exploring this together, young people. Because there's photos somewhere here where I was young back then. I was a little kid when I look at those pictures. But understanding that was really important to me. And the last thing I'll say about that is, back then, the older students, like Frank, other people, really wanted the new students coming in to understand what they went through and helping to fight for ethnic studies. And then they said, what you should do is you should go back to your community. So I was mainly with Chinese, Japanese, and Filipinos. So that was the message: go to your community and do something. You have to help be part of this community, because that is who you really are. So I said, okay. And my grandmother lived here in Japantown, so this is, I came back here, worked at UI Kind, did all sorts of things, which I won't talk too much about right now, but that was kind of how I got involved. But it wasn't so much, I'm going to be an activist. It was more, it just all made sense of understanding who I was, and understanding I now had some meaning in my life, that I'm going to figure out what happened to my family, what happened to Asian Americans, and connected to that to a whole lot of people here because of white supremacy at that time. So I wouldn't call, I don't think I thought of it as being an activist. It just kind of made sense.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I feel like that's been kind of a through line from all of you, that you didn't necessarily start off wanting to immediately think like, I'm becoming an activist. It wasn't necessarily that really started it for you. It was the people, what you were hearing, the history, also a search for identity, it sounds like as well, which all really tied together into this. So thank you for sharing all of that. And one thing I think quite a lot about is, there's different forms of organizing, right? And that organizing really takes different roles as well. Some of them not so visible, right? Like it's not necessarily that activism is just about like the person who has the microphone, right, and is making the speeches. There's a lot of different parts of this movement as well. I'm wondering, Yumi, if you could speak to some of that, like that you remember, like when you're thinking about roles that you saw that other people were mobilizing around, like what did it take to really bring this together that oftentimes maybe isn't talked about so much?
Well, I think it's
Wait.
well, you're right in that there's many roles and many kinds of people that are needed to bring the community together, to build a movement, just build coalitions and agree on a kind of a community agenda. And so I think it is really, you could call it a team, but you don't say we're going to build a team. You just rely on, people who bring the refreshments and make sure that everybody is like comfortable, just setting up the chairs, putting the chairs away, just doing the telephone trees. We used to do telephone trees, or doing the mailings, it's like bulk mailing. I mean, that is like still going on, bulk mailing, and which is a lot of work. And so I remember doing a lot of bulk mailing. and the funny thing about bulk mailing is after Stanford, I was working, I don't know where, I must have been working at Aki, and we did bulk mailing. And you had to do it in a certain way. It's a science. Okay, it's postal regulations, but not just that. You have to rely on the person who accepts the mail at the bulk mailing station. So there was an infamous guy at the Palo Alto station, Jim Shizuru. So he would come and he would say, no, this is not done right. You gotta take it back. And I thought he was the meanest guy, And then later on, I served with him on the Sequoia JCL, and he's the sweetest guy, I mean, anyway, it's just kind of like you get to know different parts of people. I mean, and so you get to know people, like say in a meeting, and everyone is like not agreeing, and there's like people who monopolize the mic, and won't compromise. We had people in our meetings talking about redress. Remember Ed Kitazumi? Anybody old enough to remember Ed Kitazumi? Uncompromising person, talking about the Salt Lake City resolution. Only if JCL Salt Lake City resolution calling for redress. And he would say, remember that? And he had this really gravelly voice, and he was tall, very imposing, tan, and he would just keep on bringing that up. There's a big, nail in the side of all these meetings that people were trying to do these agendas. And move along. He would not let us move along. He would not let us forget that there was a call for redress at a JCL meeting. And what are we going to do about it? This is before everyone had a consensus. So there were individuals like that where you think, why can't people just follow the rules, follow the agenda, Robert's rules. I never liked Robert's rules, by the way. But there were people who upset the order. So I think those are really important people. We need those people, and now we really appreciate it. And actually, that's all the dissent that we needed, all the way through until now. So dissent is probably something that we don't cultivate and appreciate among our community, even now, huh? I'm looking at Frank. Frank Abe, we're so honored to have him here. You'll keep me straight. Here's Frank. But anyway, long answer, but it's cookies, and outspoken
And mailing.
people, mailing, licking the stamps, putting the chairs away. Yeah. And
But I also love what you said about like dissent and the importance of that, right? And creating
Yes.
space for it as well.
Yes.
I think sometimes we're so focused on just building 100% consensus
Yes.
that what do we lose within that, right? And like maybe are there things that people aren't sharing because we have this pressure to want to just
Exactly.
agree with each other and not share maybe opposing thoughts. Maybe that might feel scary at times too. So you're absolutely right about that too. And I really resonate with what you're saying here. And Susan, I see that you took the mic. Did you want to say something to this?
Yeah, I was gonna say that when I was a little kid, I remember complaining to my dad about like my peers and complain. And I remember he said, isn't it nice that we're not all the same? And so I think that's one of the things that I think was really noticeable to me. So I had never been part of a Japanese American community when Julie sent me a postcard. She doesn't remember this. I was like just drowning in Silicon Valley, and I got a postcard that said, come to a meeting in San Jose, Japantown. It was Nihonmachi Outreach Committee. And so I went, and I'd never been to a Japanese American community before. And so I was really interested in all the different kinds of people that were around. And I remember later somebody said to me, if your grandfather didn't help build the Buddhist church, then you'll never fit in. And I thought, well, but I didn't kind of believe it, because I also met some really friendly people who seemed to think it was okay as long as you were doing something. But I remember, so different roles. So some people were very crotchety, and some people were hard to get along with, and some people were, so I wanted to say roles. So it wasn't just static roles, it was changing roles. This is one thing that I think was really important, is the transformation that the community went through and we went through. Like when we met some former incarcerees who, I always think of them as, how many people have read Fahrenheit 451? And do you remember the people who were the human books? So I think there were some people in the community who were like the human books. And I'm thinking in particular of Su Tokushige and Mitsuko Shiyama, who kept the flame burning even when everybody around them was trying to ignore it or get over it or just not think about it. And they told their story over and over again. So it was fresh when they told us, and it was so intense. And it was, I still remember Sue. She was such an intense person. She'd kind of lean in really close and she'd tell you this story, and her jaw was tight because it was such an emotional story. And if you get a chance to go see her testimony at the commission hearings in a little video that was put together by her grandniece, Natalie, please do, because it's a harrowing story for it. I think she was 23 years old, a new mother, anyway. But she changed, and what she changed was from a book, from kind of a crank who kept saying her story, to a leader, a moral leader of the Redress grassroots movement. So that's one thing, that a different role that people played.
Speaking about that, I think it's really important to understand that I think one of the roles that we played here in San Jose is that we knew that this movement was possible, and we knew that this movement had to happen. We couldn't say for sure we would win, because the chances were pretty slim if you're thinking about the time period. But part of it is that we knew that if there was going to be a future for Japanese Americans, the camp issue had to be addressed. Otherwise, there would be no future for us, because we would have no real history to understand. But part of the thing I wanted to emphasize is that when I came to work here in Japantown, and with the Nihonmachi Outreach Committee, which became part of the National Coalition for Redress Reparations, which if you don't know about, you can read it downstairs. The grassroots part of it, the organizing part, was that we knew that we had to find out what the people in this community really thought and felt. Not just necessarily leaders of certain groups, but because we knew people weren't talking much about this. So this is why I'm so happy that Chisa picked up on house meetings as kind of a symbol. Because there were Nisei, and they're mostly more working class Nisei, they weren't necessarily community leaders who we met. And like Sue Tokushiga, Mitsu Koshiyama, they came out kind of slowly out of the woodwork because they had not been part of some of the larger community organizations or active in those for various reasons. But it was really important for me as a young person to be able to interact with these people who are basically my parents' generation. And to understand their story had a tremendous impact on me. It went both ways though, because I think we influenced them so that they understood they have a story to tell, and it's really important, and we're interested in it, and we want to learn it, and we want other people to know, our age and everybody else in the community. But to see them transform was really, really a big deal to me. And Mitsu Koshiyama, who basically, he was a heart-bound draft resistor, and he felt like nobody wanted to hear his story. In fact, he felt like he had been kind of a pariah in this community. But when we paid attention to him, he became able and willing to be able to tell this story at different events and share it. And he became a spokesperson along with some of the other people who were like draft resistors, no-nos. So that's kind of part of the organizing that a lot of people don't talk about. It's intergenerational, but it's not just intergenerational. It's kind of this sharing and figuring out how to get a community organized. You have to be able to listen to people and understand that they're actually out there, not to just go by what some other people are saying. That'll never work. Nobody wants to talk about it, So.
Go ahead, Francis, if you had something.
Yeah, I guess some of it is I wanted to kind of piggyback on something that Susan said about, multiple roles and fluidity about your role. Because I wanted to say that all of us were involved in a lot of different kinds of work at the time. And we played different roles in those different things. So, because like for me, one of the other books that I read that my brother brought home from the strike was the autobiography of Malcolm X, and the notion of by any means necessary.
Yeah.
And our takeaway from that was that we will do whatever it takes. And we all were participating in lots of different kinds of organizing. See, I'm Chinese American, and I'm married into the Japanese American community, but I've done a lot of things. I play the saxophone, and I do other different things, but I was just flashing on, like, at basically that same time in the 80s, like Tom and I used to work very closely in trying to support the labor movement here in San Jose, particularly undocumented janitors who were, because this is the beginning of Silicon Valley. And so a lot of the janitors were undocumented, and they didn't know how to fill out the paperwork for grievances because they were unionized, Local 77. And so at our place, because we were roommates too over on 5th Street, we had one of the Chicano organizers who could speak Spanish. And then I was kind of like a community organizer, and then I would ask questions through the Chicano organizer of what the grievance was for the workers, and then my Chicano comrade would say this, this, and this, and then Tom would type up the grievance paperwork.
Yeah, Francis made me do it.
That was my role.
But this is part of how I started realizing that we all have a role to play. Because Francis said, no, this is really important. just me typing this up because, well, you have these skills to write too, and to kind of put things together. Don't you understand? This is really important for them. They can't do it. You should do it. This is, what I was being told, go back to your community and serve. But yeah, I think Francis was pretty good at stuff like that.
And later on, we were involved in the cannery workers strike. And then also, when I moved to San Francisco, I helped start a worker center in Chinatown with the Chinese Progressive Association. And so by then, I was saying, Tom, help me write this grant proposal. And so, fundraising at that level, in which actually Tom went on to do some pretty major fundraising, right, around this neighborhood, right?
Well, for the Cannery Workers Project, I did that.
Yeah. And then, but also, you went on to things that you learned in that you apply to.
Yeah, like UI Kai and other groups, yeah.
So I think a lot of it is that we were tied together, and then this idea like, okay, so back then it was by any means necessary. We also got involved when we were working with the Chicano community, we learned about Si Se Puede, so kind of an updated version of that. And so I think a lot of it had to do with like, what do you call it? Serve the people, I think, was a pretty good one, So I think that's, in some ways, when you serve the people, then there's a certain amount of humility about, not really just looking about who you are or who you think you are, but what is needed to help.
Also, one of the things that was a real highlight of my introduction to San Jose Japantown was NOC organized a program about redress, and I saw for the first time San Jose Taiko perform, and I saw PJ, who's sitting right there, and Gary Tsuchimoto and Ellen Bepp perform Gendai ni Ikuru, and I was just like, oh my God, it just really spoke to me, and I was very lucky because I think I was the last person that was allowed to join before the door slammed shut. But I felt that the rise of Taiko as a popular art form really paralleled the rise of the Japanese American redress movement, because they both operated on the same thing, which was reclaiming our identity, reclaiming our culture, making us feel hopeful and optimistic. And so that's kind of a role that different sectors of the community can play without having to have a little tag that says activist. Yeah.
What I'm really hearing from all of you is just how, what began as maybe like an interest in trying to understand like this redress movement as well, actually expanded into other areas, and you see that sort of community coming together and very much alive for all of you at different points as well. So, but I'm really, I want to go back to Tom, what you were mentioning too, and Susan, you mentioned this too, around, like I was hearing you share a little bit of the challenges, right? And movements are made up of people who don't necessarily agree with each other all the time, right? And that was certainly the case for the redress and reparations movement for this community as well, right? Some people, for instance, didn't want reparations. They didn't want to receive money. They thought that would be, offensive to be asking the government for money, or that no matter how much they get, it's not going to compensate fully. That's very true. And then there were others who were saying, well, in America, that's how they understand that something wrong happened. So we need to ask for this. But just a whole array of different feelings around this. So, how, Yumi, I want to come to you. I'm wondering about when you think back to that, what helped people stay together? What do you think was really important to be able to continue to go past, the differences that were arising?
Well, I think I was part of the NCRR, National Coalition for Redress Reparations. So we had some principles of unity, which came out of a conference, came out of discussion and kind of I don't know if we did a survey, but it was based on feedback we got in NOC or in LA, in San Francisco at JCPA, in Little Tokyo People's Rights Organization, and other like JCL chapters. But it was a basic call for I'm gonna have to help me.
Monetary.
It's either 3 or 5. It's actually 5, right? Okay, that's right. So it's that we deserve, Japanese Americans deserve monetary compensation for the injustice that took place in World War II. And 2, that we deserve a community fund to rebuild the community that was destroyed and the institutions and the culture that was attacked. So that's 2. 3 is the legal basis. Oh, first was apology, huh? The first one was apology. That's easy, right? We Japanese Americans deserve an apology from the government. So that was first. That was easy. Second is individual compensation is important. Individual monetary compensation of a minimum of $25,000. That's what we said originally. Third was the community fund. Fourth was the legal basis, to overturn the legal basis, the court cases that challenged the incarceration. And fifth was to support others who were facing similar injustices. So that served as a pretty good guide, I think. Apology, most people could say that this was wrong. What happened during World War II was wrong. And second, individual compensation, that's good, that makes sense. The amount, you can talk about. Whether it has to be money, you can talk about. But that's a discussion. Third, the community fund. Most people could see that the community needs to be rebuilt, that they were destroyed. Yeah, and so fourth, the legal base. So there were conversation points, and I think that you could talk to people about it, and try and build a little bit of unity, or just kind of, get people to think about, oh yeah, it was wrong. And I think at that time too, there was it must have been out in the culture. There must have been some mainstream, do the right thing. This idea, do the right thing. Yes, I know. Yes, I was thinking it was about that because it was a movie, but so that idea of do the right thing, eyes on the prize. That was the other documentary there. So you can see, eyes on the prize, because people would say, "Isn't this idealistic? Do you really think the government's, And so that skepticism was always there, And so I think Eyes on the Prize is very helpful. From the African American community, the movement. It's like, yes, generations. It might take, but you got to try and do a little bit, And then that's important for us to do what we can. So I think it was a conversation, and I think that it just evolved. The more people said yes, and in fact, when we talked to individuals, like through house meetings, really heard people's stories, they would say, yeah, that should not happen to anybody again. I lost this, I lost that. I mean, I would really, if you could start feeling the emotional, loss and anger and so it evolved.
Yeah, I think Yumi described that really well, because that's something I think it's really important to understand. Yuki, you were asking about conflicts, and
yes.
So at the very beginning, people said it's impossible, you can't do it. That's ridiculous. Why do you need money anyway? But because we have these principles of unity, this is the NCR brochure that you found somewhere, or Kathy found it in her closet. Yeah, Kathy was one of the NOC members who was really involved, and she's hiding somewhere.
She's right there.
Oh.
There.
But
swing the camera.
But I think how Yumi put it, these conversations, that's why the house meeting concept is a really good one for this exhibit, for local grassroots work. is that it slowly started shifting people. And we found the people, like Susan said, who had this fire burning them inside them. They really wanted to tell the story. And we were able to help them become spokespeople. It just kind of snowballed, I think. And people started going, well, maybe, yeah, we should get something back, but then there would be another little hurdle. And one of the big hurdles I feel that we went through with the Nisei was like, well, I have a hard time asking for money. And it's embarrassing. Like, I didn't suffer as much as the Issei or somebody else. I didn't suffer much at all. But I think I tried to do what my parents did to me sometimes. When they wanted me to do something, they would kind of guilt trip me a little bit. So I hope all these people forgive me, but part of what we used to do is we would talk to them and like, well, Richard Katsuda is the one to blame for this. That's somebody else we know. But
Yeah, he's not here, so we can blame him.
But what we just say is, okay, so this thing, all this was taken away from you and other people from the camps, what happened to you and the damage it did. And you have a story, you told me how bad it was when you lost everything. So do you want that to happen to other people? And, the reason why we're asking for reparations is to try to establish a point where this country can say we can't do things like that. So that got people like Sue, she said, yeah, I don't want it to happen to anybody else, right? And other Nisei said, yeah, I don't want it to happen to anybody else. I mean, I don't want to just do it for myself because it's too late for me, or however they put it. But it helped them not feel guilty that I'm just asking for money and people are thinking I'm greedy. They're going to say, no, I'm doing this for other people. And I have to say, though, it does bother me to this day, though, and it's a very emotional thing to think that these Nisei were actually telling us, we want to fight and we want to make sure this really doesn't happen to anybody, but it still continues. And so I feel badly about that.
Also, I just want to say, just really quick, so some people felt that the formation of the NCRR was divisive, right? Because I think some people felt like, well, the JACL exists, so why don't you just take the leadership of the JACL? And I think that one of the things that was pretty obvious from the principles of unity and the way that we did the organizing on a grassroots level was that, and because of divisions in the community that had originated in the camp era that were unresolved, that there were people who would not have participated if the JACL was the only organization that existed. So that was something that was interesting. So there were organizational disagreements and attacks and whatever. And I remember some people couldn't understand like this new organization. They say, "Are you the UI Kai kids?" Or you know what I mean? Like they didn't really know who we were and stuff. And I remember talking to people who said, "Oh, I like what you're doing, but I refuse to work with the JACL." And we would say, I remember saying, "Well, you don't personally have to go work with them, but they're uniting with us on this campaign. So you don't have to agree with them," and then it kind of went in the other direction too. Like, you don't have to, I mean, it was an exercise in trying to form this mature political coalition, right?
Susan, when we last spoke too, you mentioned, this moment when it was pretty challenging that you experienced personally too, quite some difficult moments throughout this too, and that you two would go to, what was it? You get mango shaped ice or something together? Thank you, yes, together and just kind of like, share the grievances and experiences that you were having. Can you share just a little bit about that?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, when I was 16, I told my mom I needed to see a psychiatrist, and she said, "No, I don't think you need to." And when I got to Stanford, I went to the Student Health Center, and they gave me a white male Freudian, and it didn't work. And so I, had to wait until I got my own insurance. But I was very depressed. I think it was because of the contradiction of racism and sexism and just all these erasure. I mean, erasure is painful. I think we don't give it its due, but like I remember racism was in the air. You could almost feel it. I mean, it was just like, that's what I mean about swimming out of it. It was just, so I was depressed, you know, I had to really struggle. I felt very alienated. I wondered whether people liked me or not. You know, there were conflicts. So I was in the San Jose Taiko group, and I was also in NOC, and I noticed that the Taiko group was very male dominated, and it was kind of uncomfortable for me in that way. And you know, felt like I was really intense compared to people in NOG. And so I felt, you know, maybe, I don't know if people liked me, you know. And so so anyway, so Tom and I started hanging out. And I remember after Taiko practice on Tuesday and Friday, and we would meet up at about 9 or 9:30, and I'd be wearing my sweats and my clown t-shirt, and we'd go to Mimosa Kim, which is over by San Jose State. It's not there anymore. And I'd get a mango smoothie, and I'd cry. And poor Tom, right? So anyway, that's the story.
What I really appreciate though about that is, you know, sometimes when we're sharing stories, it's easier to focus on like the brighter times, right? But what I think is so gripping about this is understanding that, you know, all of us have those sorts of moments of vulnerability and moments of challenges, and how we continue past that, right? And Francis, I want to come to you, because one of the things that, you know, when we spoke, you know, I asked about like, well, what are the challenges back then and that you still see today? And like the word you used was so beautifully put. It was disaffection, and I want you to kind of like explore that, like you did with our conversation earlier, and just tell us a little bit about like why you said that phrase, and kind of like what you mean by it a little bit more. And yeah, do you mind exploring that with us?
Well, I guess, I mean, that was part of trying to, at that time, that the society had a certain idea about what it was about, and the reality of it, especially for us young people, it was so much the opposite. And especially as an emerging, you know, Asian American consciousness, that this idea like we weren't seeing, our numbers are so small, we're not important, the society still wanted us to assimilate. And I think, but we were at that point of some I guess in psychology called it individuation. We're becoming people. And I think that was as becoming people, individuals, we basically saying, you know, what was the term? It was the expression, basta ya. We don't want any more of that. And so I think, but of course, we didn't want any of that, but we didn't exactly know what we wanted. So that was depressing. But I think, and one of the reasons I brought that up in the conversation is because I feel like we're in a similar moment in history right now, where there's a disaffection with the things that the institutions, the politics, and so the sense that, well, what do we look to? And so, so I guess that was part of what attracted me in some ways. This guy, Ray Liu, some of you remember him. He was a professor at Asian American Studies. He was from Mississippi. You know, so yeah, you know, like you were like one of those folks in that movie Sinners, right? Yeah. But Ray came to Stanford and was talking about Asian American studies and cultural studies, and he said, my purpose is to talk about how life is worth living. And so a lot of what he was encouraging us to do was to use our creativity to try to create a space and a life worth living. And I mean, in some ways, to tie it back to your question about the differences, is that forming an organization like the NCRR or even LOC, these are things that never really existed before. And it brought forward a kind of politics and a way to try to actually address differences and to come to consensus, as opposed to domination, or the idea was that through the course of this, and I saw that as, from my point, is that we all came to know each other better, and we all had transformative experiences in the course of that, and that was the key to finding a life worth living, and to envision a future, and because we felt we could change things, we could change the society, we could change ourselves, so.
Thank you so much, Francis. And I could keep going on and on and on, but I feel like I need to allow the audience to be able to ask a question. So before I do, I want to pose one final question to each of you. And that is, knowing what you know now, right? Like how far we've come and what still challenges we still have. If you were able to go back in time and give one advice or just one thing that you want to share to your younger selves, but the twist here is you're going to give advice to the opposite person, so meaning Yumi to Francis's younger self, Francis to Yumi's younger self, Susan to Tom's younger self, and Tom to Susan's younger self. So, who wants to go first? Who first? Tom? Tom? I think we locked eyes just now.
I think Tom should start.
I think so too. I believe that he's the baby of the group, as all of you had let me know, so I think we're gonna start with you, Tom.
Okay, I think what I would tell Susan is that, first of all, I don't, you're not weird. and it's the main thing is that nothing is set, and that as you go out and meet more people and work with them, you'll discover that that they like you. And that you can keep, and that's what we have to do, to keep learning, right? So.
Thank you. Susan?
Let's see. I guess, so I've given Tom a lot of advice over the years.
Take a note.
For people who've known Tom for a long time, you'll notice his hairstyle has changed over the years. I guess I would say to young Tom is, I guess don't worry, don't you have to develop a voice in your head that's encouraging you and not repeat the worries.
Thank you. Francis?
I would say keep doing what you're doing, because we wouldn't all be together if you didn't do that work.
I'm not entirely sure what he's talking about.
Of course, you wouldn't know what the work you did, but my purpose would be to point it out.
Thank you. I would say mostly the same thing, except I would say that that we're learning now how important it is to take care of yourself, take care of your health, and just so that we can take care of others. If we need to keep being like in serve the people mode, take care of yourself, if only to serve others, because we often get the equation. That's the only way, right? We feel like it's validated. Just like the Issei and the Nisei. We're not going to do it for ourselves. We want to do it for the future. So for ourselves as well, I mean, you know, however flawed that is, yeah, we need to take care of ourselves so that we can take care of others and do what we want to do. And you know, we're lucky that we're still here. And in spite of how we lived in those days. I mean, you know, it's really in spite of. And so, so I think, you know, I think the younger generation tends to teach us that now. Today, people realize that we need to take care of ourselves, be at our best, not just to survive, but to be at our best. You know, and then the other piece I think is just a hard one, is find a way to stay in touch with your family. You know, because when you do community work, you think you're going to just do what it takes, and that connection to family is harder. So I think we need to really take the help that you can to find ways to stay. And it's not for everybody. You know, it's not, there's times to be away from your family. There's no one way, you know, but it's just something to pay attention to, especially if you're not in the same geographical area. But even if you are in the same geographical area, you know, you may never visit each other until you have to. You don't want to be in that position where you visit only when you have to, or you might miss that opportunity. So you don't want, you know, so I think that's, I think as we have several generations that can talk to each other about these difficult things, and as we are older, we're old now and we can look back at the younger generations, we could look back at our older generations that, you know, we've helped to take care of or seen go. And so we're sort of in an interesting place, you know, chronologically as far as generations. And I think we have some wisdom that we can try and draw on and look to spirituality too, as well as, you know, mindfulness. Those kind of tools are much more available to us. It's okay, it's cool, okay? Now it's cool. In those days, I would say that sometimes paying attention to yourself felt selfish or just, you know, Santa Cruz folks. I just had to say that because you're here. No.
And Tom is the most touchy-feely.
Well, thank you so much for indulging on this last question here, but I want to open it up to audience members as well. If you have any questions, maybe we'll take one or two questions from, yes?
So I want to know more about the house meetings themselves. I mean, I love the photograph on the exhibit, and you know, I grew up here, I moved to Seattle, so where were these house meetings held? I mean, what did you do at them? What was the agenda? I assume they were after the commission hearings, before 1988, obviously. So what was the purpose of these house meetings?
The house meetings were before the commission hearings.
Before?
So we started, so Nihonmachi Outreach Committee started looking at the redevelopment of this area, but then shifted to Redress, right? So we were new to the area, actually. Most of the people in Nihonmachi Outreach Committee were not from here. There were only a couple people, Gary Gio and Dwayne Kubo, who grew up in this community, but everybody else was from somewhere else. So we had to meet people because we realized that, so there were some people who were looking at the commission hearings as being just, would get some historians, get a couple experts, get a couple lawyers, and that would be it. But the NCRR felt like the people who were in the camps had a right to be at those hearings and had a right to testify, but we had to overcome this incredible inertia of decades, right? And so we had to find people, and I can't remember exactly how we found some people, but there were
Some were from Tule Lake Pilgrimage.
right, Tule Lake Pilgrimage, and where we had discussion groups, but we went to somebody's house who hosted it. They invited their neighbors or their family. We carted in our NCRR slideshow on, a slide machine, and we had a screen that we set up, and we walked through clicking the slides and reading the script, and we talked about the principles of unity and raised all those issues. And then we said, and what happened to you? Why don't you tell us your story? And so I remember Sue and her story, which is just heart-wrenching. But I also remember people just looking at each other and then just starting to cry. And just crying for for a long time, because they hadn't talked about it for 35 years and nobody ever asked, and nobody had ever acknowledged that. Like, that's the whole point of being erased, right? And so that's what a lot, and then out of these meetings, and I can't remember really specific things, but I think out of these meetings came, I know for a lot of us Sansei, we felt we were committed. I mean, like the former incarcerees, to a person, they said, don't let this happen to anybody else. So we were like, that's our mission, that's our marching orders. So that's kind of what happened.
So if you're interested, what is house meeting, or like what all those words we were talking about, the NCRR or UIKI or all the stuff, it's all information is in the exhibit. So if you're curious about, let's check it out. And then also we also talking about what we were talking here too, and then also about beyond, like beyond the apology, beyond the compensation. Like we talk about like what was. We, as a museum, this museum probably not exist if we didn't have this egregious movement happen. So those kind of things we talk in the exhibit. So if you're curious, visit there.
One more question?
One more question?
Anyone else have any other questions? No? Oh, yes, sorry, in the back.
I'm just curious, now we live in an era of isolationism and division and separation, and someone recently said that belonging precedes participation. Do you think it is now much harder to have this same phenomenon occur and having people come together and make connection? Because many of us live in neighborhoods, we don't even know all of our neighbors. Is it still possible?
I don't know how many of you are connected with Pseudo for Solidarity. And Pseudo for Solidarity is a Japanese-American network working to abolish the detention camps and to support those who are who are incarcerated right now by ICE. And Pseudo started, what year did it start? It started before COVID, right? And the way Pseudo has developed, I think, is mainly through Zoom, because people are active from all over the country, mainly the West Coast, but I've participated in a few of the Zoom sessions. I'm not so active in all the activities, but they're very well organized in terms of when there's a Zoom, the ones that I've participated, there's always a small breakout session. So in the breakout session, there'll be maybe 3 to 5 people, and people would introduce themselves and their own situation, and many of them are very isolated. And I remember just people would talk about how this situation is affecting them. What are some of the, just emotionally, how are they doing? So people would be able to connect one-to-one in those small groups, and it's a Zoom. And also, this is all a tribute, I think, to Satsuki Ina's work, Dr. Satsuki Ina, who is one of the co-founder of Pseudo for Solidarity, and she's come up with a memoir on her family's experience. People know Satsuki Ina, right? So she's an amazing person. So she is a therapist and an educator and a former incarceree. And so she would lead after, now this is only one session that I remember participating fully on in a Zoom. So there was, after the small group session, people would come back to the greater Zoom session, and there were maybe 50, 60, 70, 80 people on the Zoom. So it's a very, wide participation. But in the large Zoom, she would help people do a centering exercise. And this is, when ICE just started getting crazy, as far as pulling people off the streets. And so I remember this exercise because I thought it was very helpful, is that she would help people center themselves. And it was a group, kind of a guided session. And what I remember is saying, everybody think about a time when they feel safe and secure. Or it could be food, or it could be smell, or it could be touch, or a person. Just think about that person, that idea, and just sit with it for a few, and then try to remember that. So if things get really crazy, just come back to that. And I thought that's a pretty useful thing. I mean, if you can, just very simple, but it's different for everybody. But I thought that's over Zoom, and just kind of the idea of being able to center and being in community and being in community action, because there's a lot of community action, that's possible. I mean, at least to some degree. And of course, Suda has a lot of in-person activities, people are, and so I think folks are finding new ways. And also,
I just want to put in a plug here for the legacy of the NCRR, that we have a bunch of folks here who were involved in the redress reparations movement in San Jose. Tom and I have co-founded an organization called San Jose Nikkei Resistors, which is a place-based in-person organization for people in this community. And we have initiated the Neighbors Not Enemies coalition, which is opposing the Alien Enemies Act and other aspects. We're now embarking on a campaign against the ICE detention center, potentially in Gilroy. And belonging is actually a big thing for us too, because we feel like a grassroots organization in person based on an existing community and shared collective memory is really important for belonging. And so please come join us.
Well, thank you so much. I think we're going to move on to our latter half of the program, but for now I want to thank Yumi, Francis, Susan, and Tom. Big round of applause. To your last question that you asked, I think if there's any message that I really took to heart from all of you, it's that we don't need to be afraid of differences or of dissent, right? You said that so beautifully. And it's what makes us stronger when we create spaces for us to be able to share different thoughts and different ideas, different ways of doing things. But being able to come together and being able to share that is what really allows us to be able to drive this forward, right? Because the redress and reparations movement, it wasn't inevitable, right? It was a challenge to begin with. And I think that we're living through a moment right now where many of the similar questions we're asking today, right? Whether it's on immigration, whether it's on democracy, civil liberties, all of those are coming back in full force in today as well. And so all of the lessons that you have shared with us, the hard moments, the happy moments, I'm really grateful to be able to have heard all of that. And we need it to be able to propel ourselves to the ongoing movements that are continuing. Like you mentioned, the Japanese Latin American movement for redress, as well as the ongoing movement seeking reparations for intergenerational impacts of slavery and systemic racism as well. So all of that together, I think I wanted to take a moment to thank the four of you again, and we're very grateful for this conversation. And I'll pass it back to Chisa.
Another round of applause to the Yuki. Thank you. So we are gonna take a 10-minute intermission. So please enjoy our little bit of snack that we have at Mugicha for summer here. After this, after 10 minutes break, we're gonna go move over to the round tables. Round table, we're gonna set the tables all over the museum right now, and then we're gonna do the 2 rounds. But if you want to stay on the one specific table, each table has topics like this. So the agriculture exhibit, it's Nali and then Francis. Could you join for the art in activism? So we talk about a little bit of art in activism. And then here in the 2nd floor, Mila mainly gonna talk, will be the moderator. We talk about the storytelling aspect of the movement. And then another one is the healing through activism. It's gonna be in a rotating exhibit. Yumi, could you go down to join the conversation? And then another table at the agriculture exhibit is going to be the role of women in the Redress movement. Susan's going to be joining the table. So we have a 2 round. We set the 2 round, but if you want to stay in the same spot, that's totally fine. And the moderator is going to help you giving the question and then help the conversation. But mainly, we just wanted to create the safe space. We just wanted to share the conversation and then chat very casually like we do at the kitchen table. So I said in 25 minutes, we're actually gonna switch into 20 minutes. But yeah, we also said sit on the chair if you want to chat, but number of participants is actually a little lower than I was thinking, so that if everybody can sit on the table, so they can not worry about the standing around. So, I just wanted to mention we have a little bit of ground rules for the round table, but this ground rules the moderator at the table is going to mention. Just initially we were trying to record it, but no recording for the table. We just wanted to have a safe space.